And to kick us off, Paul is going to talk about why we're here today.
Thanks, Yael. So last year, there were 4,145 publicly disclosed breaches that exposed over 22 billion records. With data breaches rising at a rapid pace, it's common that your personal information, including passwords, has been compromised and is available to attackers and criminals. Our passwords are at risk of being hacked and posted online. So that means alone, passwords are no longer enough to protect you and your accounts. The solution to this is multi-factor authentication, or MFA, which adds an extra layer of security to your accounts. This means even if someone knows your password, they won't be able to log into your account. So in this webinar, we'll cover the best practices on how to use MFA, enable it on your devices and accounts. All right, so the next slide, please. So multi-factor authentication strengthens security by requiring an additional piece of information beyond your password. If your password turns up in a data breach or someone looks over your shoulder, your account is more secure because the person trying to access your account will need that second piece of information. There are different types of multi-factor authentication: apps, text messages, and physical security keys. Let's go over each of these in more detail. Yael?
Yes, so if you use SMS-based MFA, SMS stands for a short message service. Most people know it as texting. It's the way you send text messages on your phone. And if you use SMS-based MFA, it means that you will get a code sent to your phone. Or you might use an app on your phone that has different codes that regenerate every minute that are connected to each app and account. And then you might actually use a security key. You can plug it into your computer or your phone when you need to, or there's a small key that actually sits flush to your computer. I actually have one right here. So that is another option for MFA. And then there's also push notifications, which are messages that are sent usually to your phone or tablet, and they give you the opportunity to allow or disallow a login. But before we get into the pros and cons, we're going to ask each of you which of the following you use the most. So we're going to do a poll, which type of MFA do you use the most? And the options here are nothing. SMS-based MFA, which again means you get a text message with a code that you have to enter on a website or an app to get into your account. And then authentication app means you'll add a code that you find on an app on your phone, like Authenticator or Authy. And then if you use a security key, it's a physical key you either have on your desk or keychain, or you put it into your computer and tap it to get into your account. And again, push notifications are messages that are sent typically to your phone that ask whether or not to allow a login. So we are going to go ahead and give you some time to vote on which type you use the most often. Okay, so we're getting some responses. The biggest percentage we have, 198 people said they use SMS-based MFA. So that's codes that are sent by text. Our next largest is nothing, people who don't use multi-factor authentication at all. So it's really great that you're in this webinar so we can talk about the reason that you do want to use this. And then we have 7% of people using push notifications, 6% using apps, and 2%, 5 people are using a security key. So that's pretty interesting. We're going to go over recommendations and then move into the reasoning behind them. So we're going to go over the pros and cons of some of these options. And authentication apps, if you use an app on your phone, it's free and it's widely used, but it is still susceptible to phishing attacks, which is when somebody tricks you into giving you their password or other sensitive information. So it's obviously better than using nothing, but it does still have that issue. And then security keys, are actually considered the gold standard. You do have to pay for them and you have to carry them around. But when somebody is trying to trick you into giving, like say you accidentally give your password to somebody who's trying to trick you, or you're on a website that is asking you to enter your password and somebody is able to trick you into entering it into a fake website, they also need your MFA code. So if you have a security key, that can't happen. So a lot of experts really prefer security keys, but they aren't available for every service. And then we had a lot of people who said that they use SMS or text messages for MFA. Paul, can you tell us why we don't recommend that as the best choice?
Sure thing, yeah. So we don't recommend SMS-based MFA unless there's no other option. With the SMS, you get a code sent to your phone. And there are multiple forms of attacks on this type of multi-factor authentication. An attacker could persuade a phone company employee to redirect someone else's phone number to a new SIM card on their own device. So this is called SIM swapping or SIM jacking. And once they have your number on their phone, they can intercept all of your security codes. SIM swapping isn't the only way you can lose access to your phone. It could be a work phone and you change jobs, or you change numbers after moving. You're on a family plan and you lose access to that after a conflict with the administrator. It also just might be temporary inability to access the code. You might be in an area where there's no cell reception, or you might be somewhere like on an airplane where you have internet access via Wi-Fi, but no cell service. So we're not recommending SMS in general. If it's the only one you can find for a service, it's better than nothing. But if you have other choices, it's best to pick that.
Okay.
All right, next slide, please.
We actually, before we go into this, we do have a lot of questions that I want to kind of dig into. Somebody asked what happens if you lose your security key. So you actually can have multiple security keys, which is what we recommend. If you have a couple, then you can use that as a backup, but there's also a lot of services that have a backup option. So if you lose your key, they will let you log in a different way. So it's usually not, it's something that you can look at before, like as you're setting these keys up, you can look into that.
Yeah,
To make
like
sure
if you
you have these
have,
backups.
it's just like if you lose the key to your house, you might get stuck, but it's a good idea to have a spare key that you keep with a trusted person or in a safe place.
All right. Let's see. Somebody asked in the are SMS-based MFA and two-factor authentication the same thing? So two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication or MFA is one thing, and then there's different types of multi-factor authentication. So SMS or text messages is one of those types, just like an app. Let's see, we have a question. Will we get, yes, we will be sending recordings of presentations after. Yeah, and somebody pointed out most accounts actually only offer SMS, phone, or email authentication, which is true. That is an issue. And actually that kind of ties into where we're going. If you do want to set up multi-factor authentication for your accounts, you have to figure out which sites you use actually allow for MFA and what types of MFA that they will allow. And so 2FA.directory is a site that does that. You can look up each of these accounts and it'll tell you what types of MFA are offered. So it'll list SMS, soft token, which is their term for what we're calling an app, and hard token, which is your physical security key. And you'll want to go to the site and click on the links. It'll tell you how to set up and add multi-factor authentication for each of the sites where it's available, starting with the ones you consider high risk. So I recommend starting with your email address because it's where password resets usually go. Okay, we have a question. What exactly is a security key? So security key, I have a couple here. It is a key that you put into your computer. You have to register it with different accounts and you'll put it into your computer. It'll ask you when you get into your account after you enter your your login and your password. Usually it might ask you to tap it. You can tap the sides of it. And it's just a way that you use to as a secondary authentication measure in addition to your password. And how much does it cost? They vary in cost. It isn't free. Like there's different types, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more later. There are different types that work for different types of accounts and different types of computers that are plug in or don't. And so that it depends on that, how much you're actually paying for one. But before we go into that, we are going to talk about, Paul is going to talk about setting up an authentication app if you decide to do that.
Yeah. So to set up an app, you're going to need to download it, typically on your phone. Some of the apps that we recommend are Google Authenticator and Authy. And if you have an Apple device like an iPhone, an iPad, or a Mac, there's one called OTP Auth. And I like this one a lot. It helps you if you have a large number of codes. So you can put them into different folders. So you could organize them by home or school or work. You can organize them by account type, like Slack accounts and Google accounts. And it also lets you back up your codes to the cloud and sync them across devices. After you have downloaded an app, you'll need to go onto the website that you want to secure and look in the security settings where you'll find typically a QR code to scan. Then using the Authenticator app, you will add a new code and it will ask you to scan the code by holding your phone up to the computer. And you want to make sure you're scanning it using the Authenticator app and not just the camera app on your phone. Once you've done that, it'll typically prompt you to enter the code you see on your phone screen to verify everything is working correctly. The good news is a lot of really popular services support this. So Dropbox, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, Yahoo, even some financial institutions will support this. And when you need to log into an account later, after you enter your username and password, you'll open your Authenticator app and you'll see the code. As Yael mentioned, this typically changes every minute. So you can read the code and type it in, or you can typically tap on the code to copy it to your clipboard and then paste it in to the app or website.
Mhm.
All right.
And these codes are actually called, some people call them timed one-time passwords. So that's another acronym we can explain. If you see TOTP, it just means it's a password that is only good for a certain amount of time and you use it once. And we have a couple of people asking what are the apps that we recommended. And you mentioned OTP Auth, which is the one that's only available for Apple users. We also mentioned Google Authenticator and Authy. And I believe all three of these, I know that Google Authenticator and Authy are free and OTP Auth is freemium. So there's a free version and then there's a paid version that has some additional features.
Yeah, and we had a question in the chat about using password managers as well. So many password managers, and including the password managers in some web browsers like Safari, will let you store your codes there, and it's equivalent to using a separate application. So if you like using your password manager and it supports this, you don't need to download and install additional software.
Right, right. Okay, so which of these approaches are also available for Windows PCs would be Google Authenticator and Authy. I think only OTP Auth is the only one we're recommending that is only for.
Yeah, well, Google Authenticator is a phone app, so it's not available on Macs or PCs typically.
This is true. Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, so in most cases, you have this on your phone or tablet and not on your PC or Mac. Yeah, let's take a look at the next slide here as well about setting up security keys. So an option that we recommend is security keys. There are a bunch of different brands. Yubico keys or YubiKeys are the most popular. And there are other options like Solo Keys, Google Titan Keys, or the Nitro Key FIDO2. The important thing is to make sure the key you purchase is compatible with your phone, laptop, or desktop or tablet. They're typically available in USB-A or USB-C variants, and you want to make sure the one that will fit. And some of the keys support NFC, which means near field communication. So if you want to use a security key with your iPhone or Android device, you want something that supports NFC. And this is the same technology you've probably used to tap to pay with your credit card or transit pass. Now, if you want to get a YubiKey, they have a quiz on their website, and it's very helpful for letting you choose which key to get. Similarly to Authenticator apps, you will need to register each key with each site you want to use it. So you'll go into the site and go into security settings. You'll put the key in your computer. You'll walk through the steps. They'll ask you to tap the key. So sometimes there's like a little disc on the key. You'll tap it, or if you have one of the tiny ones, you'll tap the side of the key. And then you typically give it a name so you can remember which key that is, especially helpful if you have multiple keys. And as Yael mentioned, there's step-by-step instructions in the 2FA.directory website. And the Yubico website also has really good documentation on this. Some sites, like Microsoft's Office 365, will require you to set up a PIN with a security key. The PIN is then saved to the key. So if you were to set up a different key, you could use a different PIN at the same PIN, but you want to think of the PIN as belonging to the physical key and not to the site. Let's go to Yael and to talk about backup codes.
Okay, yeah, but I'm going to hit a couple questions really quickly before we go. There was a question. If a website offers a QR code and suggests only one authenticator app, such as Google Authenticator, are you obligated to use that authenticator app, or can you use any auth app? Usually you can use a different one. I've used Authy for sites that recommend using Google Authenticator, and it allows me to do that. There was one site, I believe it was Microsoft, that I had to, they have a different setup depending on which type of app you use. So it asked me like which one you're going to use, and I had to say another one.
Yeah, that's right. You can almost always use the app of your choice. And as I mentioned, the Microsoft has their own authenticator app, which will generate different types of codes, but they will also let you use it, the app of your choice. You just tell them you're not using their app.
Okay, and we have another question. Can security keys be used at a distance or at a public computer? I don't have a smartphone.
So you can use them. You can use them on any computer that they'll physically fit in, whether it's your computer or someone else's. And when you say used at a distance, so you have to physically be in front of the machine to use it. So you can't use it remotely. But I'm not sure if that was the question they were asking.
Yeah, yeah, there's ways to use it. I will say I would have to look to see where you want to use it, whether it's possible to set up without a phone. So there might be.
Yeah, well, security keys you can definitely set up without a phone, because many people you would just set it up in your computer alone.
Right. There are some services though that have you set up an app and then the key. Like I think Google does this.
So Google lets you use keys. You might be thinking of Google Smart Lock, which is something they created to help use the phone as a key before security key adoption and was widely compatible.
Right. No, I think that there are some services though that require you to set up an app and then allow you to add a key on top of it.
Possible.
Yeah, so there might be, this isn't completely smooth UX or user experience across the board yet.
Yeah.
So, but it's something that you kind of have to look into and play around with.
Yeah, but most of the time you're pretty good to go with. If you don't own a smartphone, you can still use a security.
Right. Okay, there's a question on turning off the transcript. So on the bottom of your screen, there's a CC button that says live transcript, and you can click on that to turn it off and on. But yeah, speaking of a kind of a finicky user experience, you do have to, when you enable MFA on your accounts, you'll usually be given or able to generate one or more backup codes. And those are codes that let you log into your accounts if you ever lose access to your phone. So you want to make sure to store those backup codes in a safe place. And if you use the security key before setting it up, it's a good idea to be familiar with the procedures for lost keys to ensure you don't get locked out of your account. So the easiest option is to have a backup security key to use in case you lose your main one. You do have to register both your main key and your backup key at the same time. Or yeah, you have to do it in advance before you lose your main key. That said, there are, I think I mentioned this already, many sites offer recovery mechanisms in case you lose your key, and they will usually let you use an authenticator app or a backup code, which again are these one-time recovery codes that you will want to store somewhere safe. And then we're going to talk about what happens. I think there's some questions about this already. What happens when you switch phones?
Oh, this is great timing.
Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, it's really important to think about this before you get your new phone if you can. Sometimes it's unavoidable because your phone is lost or damaged and you don't have the opportunity to transfer them. But there are a couple of ways to do this. One of them is your Authenticator app might let you back up and sync to the cloud like OTP Auth does. And another method is if you use Google Authenticator, if you have both phones in front of you, you can enter the transfer mode and it lets you scan the codes on your new phone from your old phone and move them over. So ideally you have both phones at the same time. If you don't, having a backup of your keys is great. And if you don't have the ability to do that, you could physically print out the QR codes and put them in a safe place like a folder or a safe, and then you could just rescan them from your new phone.
Okay, so sorry, I got lost in the chat for a second. Yeah, okay, so just a reminder, you do want to make sure that you have your app or phone or key on you if you want to use it. There is nothing more frustrating than needing to get into your account and you need a code and you don't have your phone, or you need a security key and you don't have your security key. So I keep my security with me whenever I need to use it. So I put it on my keychain. It has a little hook that I can put on a keychain. I also keep one flush in my computer. And I take my phone with me everywhere I go, but just something to keep in mind that you do need to have this on you if you plan to use it.
And that's a great point, and it reminded me of something that happened to some folks I know. They were traveling in another country and they did not have cell phone roaming service in the country they were visiting, and they could not receive their two-factor code to log into their account. So that's another consideration to keep in mind. If you are going to use SMS and you're traveling, make sure that you can receive messages in the place you're visiting.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so we have a question that does the security key work with an iPad or an iPhone?
So yes, with an iPhone, it's pretty broadly compatible. There are a lot of security keys that support NFC, but iPads generally don't support NFC, and you'll need a special, if you have an older iPad with a Lightning connector, you'll need a special security key with the Lightning connector. And if you have a newer iPad with USB-C, there's a broad set of keys that will fit.
Okay. We have a question. What happens if Authy or another authenticator is compromised or goes out of business?
Yeah, I mean, the keys are stored on your device typically, and in most cases, they're not sent to the company. So if they're compromised, folks wouldn't have access to your codes because they're only physically in your presence. But the app might get discontinued, in which case you'd have to go and find a new one eventually, and you'd have to go through the process of transferring the codes one at a time into the new app.
Okay, we have someone who says, I have joint accounts with my daughters who live in different states. What MFA should we use so we can each log into the same account?
Yeah. So this depends on the type of account for sure. Like if you have a joint bank account, typically each person will have their own username and password. But if you're sharing some other kind of account, like say you're sharing a Twitter account, where you have to use the same username and password, then you'll have to set up the same authentication method for both folks. So, if you can be in the same place at one point to register security keys for everyone, you could you could have a key and they could have a key. Or similarly, if you had an authenticator app, you could both scan the code on each of your phones, and then you would both see the same code at the same time. And so you have a couple of options there. The phone numbers, again, don't recommend them, but it's possible that someone may let you enter multiple phone numbers depending on the service provider as well.
Let's see. Well, let's see. Okay, we answered this one already. Okay, Google is known for violating privacy using apps. How safe are the Google apps you are recommending here? It gives you a one-time password that's a code that you can use to get into your account. I don't think there's a lot of risk there.
No, the information is stored on your phone or tablet, and it's not sent to Google. It's not, and so they don't really have a way of seeing that. So and again, if you're concerned about Google in particular, or you can use a different vendor's authenticator app. There are many choices out there, and some of your browsers even and password managers have this built in. So if you have Safari or 1Password or other things like that, you can use that too.
Okay, is our recommendation to use an app? Yeah, I guess like what I normally tell people is you want to at least use an app. If you are using nothing or you're using text message based MFA, my recommendation is to at least use an app. And if you're at higher risk or just want a higher level of security and you can afford it, then my recommendation is to use a security key. Though not every service is set up to let you use a security key, but to try to use it wherever possible. Okay, we have some comments that this is confusing. So there's a couple of security planner pages that might help. One of them is just about setting up an app, and I would start there, and then look at keys. Let's see. People are asking about. Well, I think we can get to this in the end because it's not exactly about MFA. So I will leave some of these questions to the end. But I did want to talk about what to do in case of emergencies. It's not something people think about until it happens, but if there's a fire or a flood in your home and you lose access to your computer and your device and your recovery codes and your security key, then it can be a good idea to have a backup somewhere that's not your home. So that could be a bank safe, a locked cabinet at work, or even a trusted friend or family member. And if none of those are options, then just to have a fire safe or a fire bag for your codes. And it's just something to think about that people don't usually think about until there's a fire and they can't get into any of their devices.
Yeah, and that would be especially frustrating if you're trying to recover from some kind of disaster and you need to apply for assistance and you can't get into your email to get any of that help. It would be super difficult.
Okay, let's see. Somebody is asking, how would you recommend a password manager plus an MFA app if you can't do a security key? Yeah, we always recommend a password manager to everybody because it helps generate strong passwords that you don't have to memorize, and you can have a separate one for each account.
Yeah.
And yes, if you can't do a security key, then use an MFA app.
For sure. And your password manager might have that capability built in, so you wouldn't need to have two apps as well.
Right.
And these are also, if you can't afford it, you don't have to go out and pay for a password manager or app, because you can get free versions of this stuff and it's built into your browser as well.
Is there a way to use a physical security key on websites that only tell you how to set up and use phone or email two-step verification? That is when you go to the 2FA.directory site and look up to see if that's an option. Sometimes it's not an option.
Yeah. If they only support phone or email and they don't support security keys at all, you can't use it if they haven't sort of made this feature work. And it would encourage you to, tell them it's important to you as a customer.
Let's see. Questions. What password manager would you recommend? There's one, Consumer Reports actually evaluated them, and we recommend 1Password. There's a few others that are also good. I think Bitwarden was one of them.
Mhm.
But 1Password has consistently done well on our tests. Is face recognition a form of MFA, and is it safer than text or app authenticator? Do you have thoughts on that?
Sure. So fingerprint or face recognition is a second factor. It is a form of multi-factor authentication. Um, and it is helpful, and it can be more secure than using other forms because you physically have to be present to do this. To unlock the phone or device, you have to touch it, right? So that's great. And for most people, that's a relatively safe thing to do. There can be concerns, if you're in a hostile environment where you could be compelled by, a government or a violent person to, force yourself. But that for most people, it's a really good choice.
Right. Let's see. If you had to choose between SMS, a phone call, or email authentication, which one is the
Ooh.
most secure?
So if your email account is locked down with a security key, then that's a reasonable choice to do that. But the SMS has the most vulnerabilities because you have the phishing vulnerability, you have the phone company employee vulnerability, of the phone network vulnerabilities. So if you can avoid it, it's great. If you can, it's the email account and the is something that's typically a little easier to secure than the phone account. If you have an SMS service that you receive over the internet and can secure that account as well, then it's a reasonable option, and it might be more secure than just a plain old phone service from a cell phone or a landline.
So quick housekeeping. Somebody said, I see hyperlinks in the chat from X. Is that a viewer or a CR employee? How are we to know? And we have CJ or Calvin Jackson joining us in the chat, who's posting these links, and he is at CR. And we also have Amir Dalla providing support in the back end. So those are the ones coming from CR employees. Let's see. Somebody asked, what is an example of a password manager that also lets you use MFA? And I think most of them let you store
Yeah,
those.
like 1Password, which is the one you mentioned already, does that. And if you use Safari on your Mac or iPhone, it'll let you do that. And I imagine others do too, but I haven't tested them myself.
All right. Okay. Can I use a YubiKey on my laptop, but not on my iPhone?
If you want to.
Yeah. Yes. Is the built-in, I'm not really sure I know exactly what this refers to. Is the built-in iPhone security key the same thing?
So typically with your iPhone, as we mentioned earlier, you have Touch ID or Face ID. And some sites let you use that the way you would a security key. Right? So they'll say type your password, then they'll say unlock with Touch ID or Face ID. So it's not the exact same as a security key because you can't move it from computer to computer or phone to phone, but it's similar in that it requires a physical device, like you have to be holding the phone, and it requires a biometric or a pass key to get in to activate that. So it's close, but it's not identical. So, and it is a good choice if you have it.
All right. Thoughts on a book of written, okay, this is about passwords. Thoughts on a book of written passwords versus password managers. Mine are less obvious, even written. So I recommend the password manager because it will auto-generate passwords that are probably more random than ones that you come up with. And it's easy, it'll either autofill or you can kind of paste it pretty easily.
Yeah.
So I recommend it just because it's easier to use.
That's really great point, is things that we all think we're really clever and can come up with things that we couldn't guess, but that doesn't mean somebody else or someone else's computer couldn't guess those things that we think are not obvious or hard hard to figure out. And whereas a computer, when it generates 31 characters of random stuff, that's pretty hard to guess. Another advantage of the password manager is that it will fill the password only on the correct site. So if you save a password on, google.com or microsoft.com, it will fill the password on that site, and it won't fill it on a fake version of the site that's designed to trick you. Whereas if you just have a written book, it's easier to be fooled.
Right. Okay. Let's see, we have a question. Oh, people are asking about password managers again. And we recommended 1Password. There's actually, we can throw in a link in the chat on the different, CR actually did an evaluation of different password managers. So we can throw that in the chat. Where do you rank security level of typical financial sites that after your username and password login, they send a one-time code to a different device, PC via email rather than to your phone via SMS? And that's actually kind of interesting because I think it's really fascinating that a lot of banks don't yet allow you to use the security key, and some don't even allow an app. They just send you a code, usually via email.
Yeah, I'm disappointed too. I would love to see banks and healthcare companies do better. Like, you can make a blog with cat pictures and have the best security possible with security keys, and yet all of your money requires a text message as its form of two-factor authentication.
Right, right. The cool thing
Yeah,
is that banks have other levels of control. So if somebody gets into your account, that money is guaranteed, and they have like
for sure,
ginormous fraud departments.
for sure. But it might take a little while to get that money back.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just, at least there is that
Yes.
level of.
They are regulated, and they are, they can be required to help fix you, but it's much easier to prevent a problem than to fix it.
Right.
So again, if anything that's being sent to your email, it depends on how locked down your email account is. If you're using a password manager and you've generated a random unique password for your email, and you're using security keys and requiring only security keys to get into your email, then your email is pretty secure, and the codes are harder to intercept.
Right.
But you can still
Okay.
be, tricked, and you have to be really careful that you're really on the bank site and not on a phishing site pretending to be the bank site.
Right. Which is why security keys are so cool, because they kind of do that heavy lifting for you.
That's right. You don't have to worry about being tricked because you can't be.
Right. Okay, let's see. If my passwords are saved in Google and auto-populated when I go to a website, what level of protection is that? So I think they're talking about autofill passwords that people save
Yeah.
within their browsers.
Yeah. I mean, that is just like, that's using a password manager. It's using, and that's great because, as we talked about earlier, it makes sure it only fills the passwords in on the legit site and not on a spoof site. And it also means you're probably using a randomly generated and unique password. So that's a good security choice.
Right. I think it's a little different than a password. I think it's like browser based. You
Yeah,
can
but
actually save it, but yeah, no, you're right. But actually, that leads to this next question. I have always worried about password managers getting hacked. We talked about this last week too. Are they secure because they generate your password once and then change each time, but they have all of your accounts? Yeah, so these are kind of two separate questions. One is, I guess, about storing your passwords in password managers. Um, like, what if those companies get hacked? And I think they because they are security companies and they put a lot of energy and resources towards securing that information. So I'm not as worried about them getting hacked because they have levels of control if you're using a good one. And then as far as if somebody hacks into your password manager, can they also get access to your one-time passwords? They would have to use them really quickly. So yeah, I don't.
well, so the thing about this is also, if depends on how they hacked into the security company, because even the security company might not have access to your passwords because they're still protected with your master password, right? And so they would get an encrypted thing, which presumably would be hard to break. So it would be still pretty opaque to them. Now it's possible there are other flaws, and so none of this is 100%, but it's still a much better level of protection than the alternative, which is typically, using easy to guess passwords or reusing passwords.
Right, right, right. Yeah, in the breaches we have seen when password managers were hacked, they usually didn't actually they got some information, but they usually didn't get everybody's passwords because there were layers of control in there. Let's see, we have, okay, how can you use, okay, I think we answered this, but I'll go over it again really quickly. How do you use a security key on sites that only tell you how to set up and use phone or email two-step verification? So it's possible you're not able to. It's possible that they don't have that set up yet. So if you go, there's a site that we mentioned, 2fa.directory, and that will tell you whether they accept security keys. I think they call them hard tokens. And so you can get that information there.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, if the site or app does not support security keys, then you can't use them. It's something they have to affirmatively take steps to do on their part. And again, you can certainly let their customer service know that something's important to you and ask them to support it in the future.
My credit union had an authenticator app as an option. They did an upgrade and that option went away. Oh, bummer. That's too bad. Let's see. Someone said, I run an antivirus app and have a VPN on my phone. What are your thoughts on that plan? So these are kind of separate, those two separate things. Like antivirus will screen your computer for viruses that it can identify, and VPN stands for virtual private network, and it's a tunnel that will connect you to, it's like a secure tunnel. So those two different things than multi-factor authentication. So I would say you should be using multi-factor authentication. And then having family members pass away and needing to take over their life affairs, a written password list is the most valuable. I also needed to get their emails shut down. All of the many subscriptions and internet MoneyGrammars tied to it's really interesting. Milani Pinola at Consumer Reports wrote an article about how to handle estates. And there are password managers, somebody mentioned, that have family accounts, so you can still have access to their passwords. And there's other things that you can do, like you can have that person's security key. Some people put their main password, like they give it to their attorney. There's different things that you can do.
And some of the bigger sites like Google and Apple and Facebook have the concept of a legacy contact, where you've identified somebody as having permission to get into your account, should you die. And that's an option you can consider as well. But yeah, having a password manager and having your relative use a password manager and making sure you know the master password to that password manager is great. And option, anytime you have a physical piece of paper and I'm worried about it getting lost or damaged.
Awesome. Amira posted, I was just trying to, the article in the chat. Let's see. So how do you sync your password manager app with your browser password manager? You don't know which is recommending a password to use. That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, you trying to use two at the same time is hard, and they will both try and suggest things. And I would recommend picking one or the other, whichever one you prefer, and turning off the other one. So if you have a password manager and you like that, turn off password saving and filling in your browser, and then use the password manager. And if you have a bunch of passwords in the browser, you can typically export them and then import them into your password manager, and then they're all in one place, which should be the easiest and least confusing way.
Okay, this is a similar question. If I save passwords on a password manager on my laptop, do I need a different password manager for my phone? And most password managers, I think all the ones I've looked at also have phone apps. So you can use, you can sync
you'd
it
want to use the
across
same one on both devices so they can share passwords. Like if you use one password manager A on your phone and password manager B on your computer, then you'd have to enter and save everything twice, and that would be a lot of extra work.
I use AOL and never use them to save my password because I'm not sure that it is safe. Did you say this was a safe way to save passwords? I don't think it's actually the company itself that's saving your password. I think it's your browser.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Aren't password managers being hacked? I read about a compromise. Like there was a password manager that there was a compromise, but they didn't actually get everybody's passwords. They got some information.
Yeah. And like all software that has been written has some kind of bug in it, and somebody will discover it. And responsible password manager companies are really good about fixing these quickly. But again, typically, even if these are hacked, you still don't have access to your own passwords because they're typically protected by your master password. And again, you're still the alternative to using a password manager is usually to have passwords that you try and generate on your own and try and memorize on your own, and you'll pick the same password or pick easily guessable passwords,
Right. And that's
and
the
that's
majority. Oh, sorry.
yeah. So that's the more likely to be the problem you're going to run into. Like that's
Yeah,
a
the
real problem that
majority.
happens all the time, and the other is kind of a theoretical problem that might happen.
Exactly. Yeah, we see all the time that people's accounts are compromised because they're reusing passwords or because they're using easy to guess passwords. And so that's much more common. Um, and then let's see, we have a question. Can a password manager save my current passwords or is that defeating the purpose? So if your current passwords are not good, random, long, then yeah, you want to redo those passwords. And you don't want to just save bad passwords in your password manager, but if you have good passwords, like if you are exporting them from your browser or whatnot, then I think that's fine. Let's see. Does a VPN do the same thing? No, a VPN is separate. The multi-factor authentication, I think it's more important actually than trying to figure out whether or not you want to use some of these other tools. Like I think password managers and multi-factor authentication are way more important than these other.
And you have written many great articles on both whether or not you even need a VPN and which one to choose. And I'm sure your colleagues at CR can help link to those.
Sweet. Okay, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. Um, let's see. Oh gosh, there's a lot of questions. Um, hmm, trying to narrow these down. What are the drawbacks of having a password spreadsheet on a hard drive? So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of them. One is you're a little reliant on physical access to the computer and the hard drive. Like, is your hard drive encrypted? Who has access to the computer, right? So in terms of other people seeing it, and then you also, are limited to only using it from that one computer. So if you have a password manager, for example, and you have, a home computer and a work computer or a phone and a computer, then you can have access to the secure passwords from multiple locations.
If I already have numerous accounts with passwords, how do I convert to a password manager so slowly? So you want to slowly update those passwords, starting with your email and your most important accounts.
Yeah, I would make a list of your passwords and then your sites that you use. And if you tried to do it all at once, you'd probably get frustrated or exhausted. But maybe say do 5 or 10 of them, for the day, and then take a break and give yourself a reward. And then and make a goal. Maybe by the end of a week or a month, you'll have gone through your accounts.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so we're gonna start wrapping up, but reminder, we are gonna be sending you all of the links that we mentioned in an email. Um, and so we'll be sending you that. We'll send the recordings, we'll send the slides. If you had trouble setting this up, we're gonna be sending resources that you might be able to do that on your own more slowly. We do have one more webinar coming up. Um, and it is on finding and deleting old accounts that you no longer use. So we will post the link to how to sign up for that in the chat. And please let us know what topics you want to see in future workshops. And if you haven't already, please check out securityplanner.org for customized advice, not just on MFA, but just on staying safer online. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, Paul. This was great. And
Thank you so much for having me.
yeah, and we will see some of you all next week.